This time on Poll Hub, the battle over what to ask in the next U.S. Census reaches the Supreme Court, and the decision could have a huge impact on government, politics, and polling. We'll explain. Then the political editor from our polling partner NPR, and a guy with one of the best names in politics, Domenico Montanaro, is here to talk politics and polls. What'd you expect? His recipe for amatriciani? Let's do this. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
We have talked a lot about the census in the last, 18 months here. Part of it is that the census is very important in polling, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but also because the census has become a big political issue. And it's because the Census Department, the Commerce Department, which runs the U.S. Census, wants to insert a question about nationality, about where are you from, what country, are you a citizen of the United States or not? And that's raised a lot of questions, in part because there is research to suggest and to support the idea that if you ask that question, fewer people will participate in the census and there will be an undercount. The Supreme Court heard the case this week, and at least from the Supreme Court watchers and reporters, it certainly seems like the conservatives on the court, the five conservatives, seem likely to rule that the Commerce Department can indeed add this question in 2020. Who cares? Why does it matter? Not to pollsters. Let's do the political one first. Who cares?
Well, this is a really big deal because it has to do with who ultimately is included in the census. And in fact, if it's true, as you suggest, that some people may be reluctant for a variety of reasons that we can get into to respond to the census because of that question, well, that can affect how the population is counted in terms of seats for Congress. That means seats for the Electoral College. It talks about funds that might be distributed based on population, federal dollars going into different areas.
I just want to make clear here, because non-citizens can't vote. So how does it make a difference in the Electoral College or the number of House seats that a state gets?
The census actually does not require citizenship for people to be counted in it. So the population is the big deal when it comes to the census. And so that is how things are sort of, the pie is divided. That's the basis of that. It's a good point of clarification there.
It should be pointed out that the question, although new in the modern era of census taking, is not a new question and was asked on the census, I believe, through the 1950 census. I think the difference is...
And it continues to be asked in a small portion of the census,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Yes, in the American Community Survey, which is a regular measurement that the census does between the decennial measurements where they count everyone. So it's not that it's missing information or that information that can't be gotten in any other way. I think what's different, though, I don't believe that they are asking the question in the context of whether or not people were born in another country, which was the usual way that the census question had been asked in the past. So if you said you were born elsewhere, the follow-up question was, well, are you now a citizen? I think it's going to be just that question itself. And in the current political context, yes, it certainly takes on a very different meaning than it has when it has been asked in previous census taking.
And that's why this is such a big distinction you're making here.
But the issue here is about accuracy. Mm-hmm. And so...
Yeah, how does this affect us in the polling industry? Why do we use the census? It's fundamental. It's a bedrock. We can't do accurate polling without, if not the census data, something really similar to it, and it's the census data we use. Why does it matter to us?
Because when we do surveys, and including when the census does surveys between the 10-year census, what we're starting out with, and what's important to start out with, is what we call in our statistical jargon population parameters. It means that you want to look at your sample that you're taking in a survey, in other words, a small small portion or sample of the group of people you're talking to, and then compare that sample to what we have as real numbers when someone else went out and counted everybody.
Everybody, right.
Exactly. And so that's what the value of the census is to polling and to surveying, is that no one else is able to go throughout the country and count everyone.
So if there's an undercount in the 2020 census, Lee, what does that mean for our polls after 2020? Are they less accurate?
Well, no, I mean, I think we will now look at the ACS numbers, and there may be other things that we start to think in terms of. But then the question is, how inaccurate are they in terms of, these population parameters? And that it becomes something we're going to have to, provide a little more guesstimate to than concrete numbers for. And I think, look, realistically, this is not about how pollsters are going to, carry on with their data and how we're going to weight accurately, but it is about sort of what's become a partisan issue, and the Supreme Court getting more and more into the partisan side of this. And I think that that's something we're seeing now in Washington with the climate. I guess the court is not immune from this. And, I think we're going to see it more. I mean, you even hear about, well, if there's impeachment questions, it's going to end up at the Supreme Court. I mean, this is not the old, I'm going to take my case to the Supreme Court. I think things are going to be getting increasingly part of the legal process.
Gore versus Bush in 2000 was
big deal.
We-
But it
we've
could come
talked-
back.
Guys, we've also talked about how people are losing trust in a lot of institutions. When we ask about the presidency, when we ask about Congress, when we ask about the media, we see a decline in the confidence that people have in these institutions. For a long time, the Supreme Court has been immune from that. And I think that we're starting to see, as you mentioned,
erosion. Erosion
with
in the support of the Supreme Court of the
Gore and
trust.
Bush, perhaps also somewhat with this kind of tribe mentality and greater polarization in the Kavanaugh hearing, we're definitely starting to see an erosion, and this may just add to that.
And the president is tweeting about making America great again by knowing who's in this country. So, it has certainly gotten the attention of Congress, the courts, and, surprise, surprise, the White House.
Well, we are very lucky today. We are joined by Domenico Montanaro, NPR's lead political editor, and also one of our partners in polling crime when we do national polls with the PBS NewsHour as well. Welcome, Domenico. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on campus.
We heard that this was your first time coming up to the Hudson Valley in Poughkeepsie.
It's interesting because I grew up in Queens, right? But I've never actually, and I've kind of passed by the Hudson Valley. I guess I've been in it on the other side. I've been to West Point. But I've never been to Poughkeepsie itself. Been up to Albany. My brother went to Albany for college, so I've been up there. But this was actually really nice. Took the train, I guess this is what Billy Joel was talking about when he said the Hudson River line.
It's exactly what Billy Joel was talking about. So glad that you could join us. And on campus, too. You'll be visiting with some of Lee and Mary's students later this evening.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
But first, we wanted to grab you because, it's, as always, there's lots of political and polling news that comes out of D.C. these days. And I guess we're in do we call this the post-redacted Mueller report world now? So just to kind of start off, what has been your biggest takeaway from the Mueller report? And is there something that we've missed in the coverage, or something you think that we might be looking at down the road that we haven't really been talking about?
Well, I think kicking forward, the biggest thing is that we're much more likely now to see Robert Mueller himself actually testify, because I think with the politicization of William Barr, the Attorney General, I think his testimony May 2nd is not going to satisfy Democrats in any way, and they have called on Robert Mueller, who conducted this report and this investigation, to actually testify on or before May 23rd. And I think that that's really important, because he's somebody who's been silent for almost 2 years as President Trump has taken whacks at him, at the report, saying he's conflicted, saying that it's a witch hunt day after day after day on Twitter, and we're finally going to be able to hear from him, most likely.
Yeah, one of the things from our polling that we've done with you, I've been struck by, despite that pummeling, his investigation remained fair in the eyes of most Americans. And I thought that was sort of a fascinating, because in politics, as you know, if you define someone who's not well known,
and they can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, and you're asking for trouble politically in that regard. What Congress is sort of in a different place now, particularly the Democrats and with the presidential campaign going on. What's Nancy Pelosi? How many directions is she going to be pulled in at this point?
Well, yeah. I mean, the first thing about what you're talking about with Mueller holding up, it's kind of fascinating considering where Ken Starr was in the 90s after and during that Clinton impeachment investigation, and how he wound up not holding up, and what his reputation has been after that. I think part of that is because of what a polarized society we're in. But you have a lot of people still in our polling showing that they don't really even know Bob Mueller very well. They don't have much of an opinion of him. So that's why I think him going before Congress is going to be so fascinating and so interesting, him putting his credibility on the line if and when he decides to actually do that. On your question about Nancy Pelosi and where she goes from here, I think we've got two I words that everyone's talking about: impeachment and investigations. And she's trying to hew much more closely to the investigations word rather than impeachment, because she did see the polling toll that it took on Republicans when they impeached President Clinton in the 1990s. He left office with more than 60% approval rating. That's far different than where Democrats have President Trump right now, considering.
Absolutely.
And they don't want to be in a position where going into 2020, even though Republicans won that election in 2000, they don't want to be in a position of having President Trump be able to hammer them day after day saying that Democrats are the ones who tried to impeach him.
Yeah, you mentioned Ken Starr, and help me to not be too cynical, but compared to the Clinton proceedings and what may be occurring now, Democrats seem to be saying just the opposite of what they were saying then, as are the Republicans. We have a flip on both sides. So if you were for the hearings then, now you're against them. If you're against them then, now you're for them.
Well, yeah, I think that is part of the political polarization. Mm-hmm. But I wonder, if things were reversed, and this was President or Obama or President Hillary Clinton.
Remember Benghazi?
Are
we still talking about that?
Yeah.
Least convinced there's someone out there whose name is Ben Ghazi, and he's had a really rough decade.
Feels like a real Lee joke to say, man, I couldn't stand that Benghazi or that Al Qaeda.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
There you go.
Dear.
I've made that joke before.
Oh dear. but I mean, wouldn't the Republicans be taking a different tact this time? I mean, the Democrats are pondering this publicly and seem to go through this, these machinations, about what they're going to do. And I get the sense that if it was reversed, Republicans would jump on this in a heartbeat.
You have the Democratic House Judiciary Chairman, Jerry Nadler, who would shepherd those impeachment proceedings on Meet the Press with my old boss, with Chuck Todd, and he was asked, are there impeachable offenses in this Mueller report? After a bit of a pregnant pause, he said, yeah, I do. So then what's the point then, right? Like, wouldn't you then continue those impeachment proceedings? Clearly, Democrats are reading the politics here and the polling, and they're thinking, you know what, this might not be worth it, as Nancy Pelosi has said, because what one Democratic strategist told me was, we can use the political argument about this and whack Trump with it in 2020, but we don't want to give him the ammunition. But there is an argument, like you're saying, morally and for the sense of democracy. If you think that there were abuses of power here, don't you then have an obligation to go forward with impeachment proceedings? That's the balancing act that they have to play.
And a lot of Democrats are going to be making just that argument.
And we have a lot of Democratic nominees, and more every single day.
Yes.
What do you foresee for our Democrats? Do you foresee a smooth sailing or a pretty bumpy ride and nasty primary season?
Well, when you've got what's going to be 20 for 2020 jumping in the campaign here, you're going to have Joe Biden most likely get in this week, and the former vice president, he will be the 20th major Democratic candidate to get into this race.
It's amazing.
Which is the largest field anyone can remember. And you've got them, essentially going to be making huge cases, not so much against each other, not even so much against President Trump, but about their ideology, which direction they want the party to go. Some people, like Pete Buttigieg, make an argument about generational change. On board with him, someone like Seth Moulton, who just got into the race, the congressman from Massachusetts. You have all these candidates making various arguments ideologically where they want to sit, but most of them kind of agree. But the thing that I think we'll find in a lot of our polling, which we've seen, nobody knows who these people are. Joe Biden right now leads in the polls because of name recognition, because people know who he is. And I think that that's one advantage that a large primary can actually create, is that once they all get on a Democratic debate stage,
which is going to happen very soon.
Which
it's
will
actually
happen
going to
very
start
soon. And then those early state primaries of Iowa and New Hampshire, the caucus state in Iowa and the primary state in New Hampshire, that will act as a very fast funnel to winnow this race down to just a couple or a few people. And I think that has the potential to enlarge a candidate. That these primaries with a large field, someone who emerges from that field, it's got to be pretty good.
If given that there seems to be kind of just such a low bar for them to also stay in, do you think it will take to the primaries before people start dropping out? Because I'm thinking we have two debates coming up, in June and July. June and July. And so do you think the debates are going to whittle people down, or you think they can kind of hang in, especially with their social media fundraising?
Well, it depends on how well they do and whether or not they're able to gain some traction with people or not. And also what other, kind of machinations play out. I mean, if one candidate who's on a more pragmatic wing of the Democratic Party suddenly sees one of those more progressive candidates who they think can't win suddenly taking off, maybe then they decide to try to corral with some others, or vice versa. If you have some progressive candidates who don't like seeing a certain pragmatic candidate suddenly take off and do very well and feel like that's not the direction the party needs to go, then you might see some endorsements that happen. You also have the problem that Scott Walker had on the Republican side in 2015, where he had a bloated campaign. He raised a lot of money, but he spent way too much money. He had way too many staffers.
The so-called burn rate.
Way too many consultants, and he couldn't last. He couldn't pay for those plane tickets to go to Iowa, New Hampshire, and get on the bus to all 99 counties.
I've always wondered why candidates don't sort of keep a few bucks for South Carolina and Nevada later. Can they all shoot it in Iowa and New Hampshire or
This
before?
is like a meta conversation about our 21st century spending and saving habits, Lee.
Yes, if you got it, you spend it.
Put it. Are you saying we should put it in a lockbox?
That's
only
harken
people
back.
of a
Yes,
certain
harken
age
back.
will remember that.
yes. Okay, so you're a political editor, political reporter. You've been doing this for quite some time. You've seen lots of different presidential campaigns. What do you do to cover? How do you plan a campaign coverage when you do have this 20 candidate field? It's sort of, I liken this to the Kentucky Derby when they just get off and start running because there's just so many horses you can't keep your eye on everybody at once.
When you're NBC News or when you're NPR? Some of us have a lot of money, and some of us, would like you to support your local stations. We have to plan our coverage smartly.
Okay.
I think that we at NPR take a pretty good big picture view of the kinds of themes and big think ideas. We have a really smart audience at NPR, and we know that we can't treat them with a level of disrespect and hype that they don't expect from us. They expect us to give it to them straight, to have them, but also to not overwhelm them with kind of minutia on a daily basis that's not really what they want, right? We have to have context, be smart, be fast, and try to identify themes. Like I said, when we send people out to cover a rally, we're almost always sending them with 2 or 3 story ideas. So, Don Gagne, one of our great reporters, and frequently an American treasure, been out there covering these candidates for a long time. He's going to go to a rally. He's not going to come back and just file one story. He's going to stay there for a weekend, pick up another story or two based on whatever thematically we've been seeing. And part of that is informed by our polling.
And the other is what's the lead, and you need more than just that. You need the kind of the context and the depth.
Yep.
Yeah, well, as political editor, you have a lot of polls, not just ours, that come across your desk. So, what do you look for in assessing polls and whether they make air, whether they're newsworthy and up to the standards?
This is a
of,
funny question, because usually it's me calling you to say, how should we read polls, and then
Okay, well, that's a start.
Then I take that information and I distill it for our executives to tell them, here's how you're supposed to read polls. So thanks for asking me.
Well,
but
because
we're
not talking every day.
What I've learned from talking to all of you, but also from
You knew you're being a little humble on this. You had a little bit of a head start.
Well, and here's the thing about polling, and you guys know this, we look at the trend lines, right? I mean, I think that it's really the worst mistake possible to look at polling on a day-to-day basis. Remember those daily tracking polls? I know that drives you guys more nuts than it does me, because you know the science behind it.
Absolutely.
And the fact is,
or lack thereof.
Right. Every third day, you knew there was going to be a 2-point dip, because that's just the nature of the kind of statistics that they got,
exactly.
right? So, trying to quell some of that, I always tell people one nice little shortcut is, if you see a poll with decimal points, don't believe it.
A little too specific.
The methodology with that is probably not that great. When you're looking at something that's 3.5 percentage point margin of error, that means it could be 3.5 points lower or 3.5 points higher. That's a swing of 7 points. If the middle moves, that's a big deal. So you look month to month over that swing. So if you were to look at President Trump going from 41 to 39 up to 42, it's nothing. That's the same. If you see him going from 45 to 35, now we're talking about an actual change.
And obviously the attention's been on his base and how that doesn't seem to erode. But going into 2020, the base doesn't seem, on first blush, to be enough to actually carry the day.
He's got a high floor and a low ceiling, right?
Okay.
I mean, he's somebody who is not going to drop much below, 35%, as if the economy is still strong and there aren't a hot war where you've got numbers and numbers and numbers of American soldiers and troops who are dying every day. So short of those two things happening, I don't see much decline, and there hasn't been much decline.
No, it's been amazingly steady.
Exactly. But he also hasn't gotten much above 45%, if ever, right? And because of that, I think you've seen a lot of the country, and I think one of the great questions in our poll that we've done is, are you going to definitely vote for
him,
or definitely vote against? And seeing a president who's 54 to 57% definitely vote against, that's a pretty difficult number to overcome.
Yeah, in Gallup's polling, and they've been doing this longer than anybody else, he's the only president never to break 50% approval at any point in his administration.
Yeah.
Well, Lee mentioned that you were being humble when you were talking about your lack of experience with polls, because you did work at NBC for quite a while.
I have experience with polls. I just listen to the pollsters.
Oh, very kind, very kind. But, one of your former colleagues, Chuck Todd, was interviewing Rudy Giuliani this weekend, and you tweeted, "This exchange is our reality."
Yep.
So let's see, it was Chuck Todd to Rudy Giuliani on Meet the Press. So it is now okay for political campaigns to work with material stolen by foreign adversaries? Giuliani: "It depends on the stolen material." What goes through your mind when you hear an exchange like that?
Well, I tweeted it, that's our new reality. I mean, the fact of the matter is the Trump campaign, while it was found to not have anyone within the campaign to have been coordinating or cooperating with Russia in a basis that the Mueller team felt they could prosecute on a case of criminal conspiracy, that doesn't mean that there wasn't any collusion, that there weren't, as the Mueller campaign said, were numerous links to multiple contacts. It's not that they acted ethically here either, and that's one question that Rudy Giuliani was asked by Jake DeDapper on CNN, and he said, "Oh, we're going to debate morality now."
If you do that, you're not going to have anybody running for office.
I mean, there are certain.
Is that true?
Well, no. I mean, there are certain norms that a lot of other campaigns have done and dealt with that this campaign decided to completely askew. The fact of the matter is, when a foreign adversary comes to you and says, hey, I've got some dirt on Hillary Clinton, would you like it? Normally what a campaign does is takes that and says to the FBI, hey, I got this weird phone call, this weird email, this weird thing that somebody reached out to me. I don't know what to do with this. I don't want anything to do with it. That's normally what happens. What the Mueller report said is that Russia was working for the benefit of President Trump, hoping that he would win, and that the campaign expected to benefit from it.
Yeah, so it's quite a different ballgame.
Is this going to be our future? I mean, we've gone from spin to alternative facts.
Well, I mean, there's a degree of sunshine that's been now shined on this. You can expect that the FBI is probably going to be listening to the 2020 campaign. You know, call it spying, call it whatever you want, but they're going to probably be keeping closer tabs on what's going on within both campaigns, whoever the Democratic campaign is, and not. So I think that, you know, they say sunshine's the best disinfectant. This is probably part of what's going to be happening. Now, you never know where the next threat is coming from.
Yeah. It's never the same both times in a row.
It might be the 400-pound guy in New Jersey this time. You never know.
I've heard about him.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming up
Sure.
to Poughkeepsie and doing the podcast. And I
love
think
it.
he's
Well,
earned,
he's not done yet. He's going to be talking to your class.
that's right. Well, he's earned his supper now, and now you can continue.
What do we
to-
eat?
You're
Oh, be very
bringing,
good.
you know, you're bringing in a very experienced teacher here.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, because Domenico taught high school English. Is that correct?
I did. I
years.
taught high school English for 3 years. It was a great experience. I always say it was, it was the best preparation for being on air because you're really held accountable. Everything you say can and will be held against you. And
now
you
with
know,
social media, it's
and,
only
oh man,
more so.
forget it. Well, luckily this was 15 years ago. So, but no, it was great, and it also I think helped to speak in a subject verb object way so that you could sort of try to distill something down. I remember when I first did television and my heart was pounding out of my chest, the thing I thought about was, what would I say to a 12-year-old? What would I say to a 14-year-old? How do I deliver this so that it's the clearest way possible? And I think taking things that are complicated and making them understandable for regular people has been my motto, and I think it's been well served.
Yeah,
and
well,
something you
great.
do really well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And we'll look forward to seeing you in class a little bit later.
Thanks
Awesome.
so much.
I'm looking forward to the food.
And that'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll here at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, which in the springtime is an awfully lovely place to be. Mary Griffith is our executive producer, and Kenny Marples is our soon-to-graduate and not to be around for much longer editor. We're going to have to find somebody new.
We may even have to give him a present.
I like that plug for the Hudson Valley tourism. That's wonderful. Well, we'd also like to thank the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University, who actually is not far from the Hudson Valley in New York, a little bit west of where we are. And they provide us with the ability to look back in time at survey questions and results over the decades. So if you're interested in coming to New York, there's lots of places to see and enjoy this springtime.
Are you going to sing the I Love New York song now, Lee?
No.
How about
But
New York Peace of Mind?
not that either. Not that either. This
Is it
getting,
peace of mind?
It's state of mind.
State of mind.
I think
Thank
this-
you.
I think
Yeah,
this-
I knew that. Something
I think
didn't
the
sound
spring
right.
is getting to you guys.
It's the pollen. It's the tree pollen, actually.
Well, Roper takes care of questions, and if you have any questions of your own, please send them to pollhub@marist.edu and reach out to us on social media. You can find us at Marist Poll on Twitter or Marist Poll on Facebook. And as Jay DeDapper will tell you very often, do not, ladies and gentlemen, forget to subscribe. That does it for now.